Hey everyone, this is a Barclay Damon live broadcast of the CyberSip, practical talk about cybersecurity. I'm your host, Kevin Szczepanski. Let's talk. Hey everyone, welcome back. I'm your host, Kevin Szczepanski, and today we are here with the founding member and co-leader of the Barclay Damon Cybersecurity Team. Nick DiCesare counsels his clients on best practices to securely maintain electronically stored information, and he serves as a breach coach, which for those of you who are football fans means essentially that he is the quarterback for the client in investigating and responding to data breaches and other cyber incidents. And he's here today to talk about 4 keys to preparing for a data breach. Nick, welcome to CyberSip.
Thanks, Kevin. Happy to be here.
Thank you so much. We've been trying to get you on for a while. Keep meaning to get together, and we're finally here, and I'm happy to have you. We want to talk about the 4 keys to preparing for a data breach. And first and foremost is knowing your data. And I think we've both heard, and those of us who have been in this business for a while understand that you can't protect what you don't know you have. So walk us through the importance of first and foremost knowing your data and what you do with what you know.
Yeah. So this topic today is really all about the whole ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And when we are called in to a breach situation, for a breach coach to investigate it, the clients who have gone through these preparatory steps, who know what they have, where it is, and have anticipated that something like this could happen, are going to be miles ahead of clients who are just looking at cyber issues the very first time when something really bad happens, ransomware attack and the like. And knowing your data is hugely important because, ultimately, you get hit with a ransomware attack. Everything is offline. You don't know, how are you going to access your data? How are you going to operate your business? Well, what do we have? What are our key operational data? Where is that stored? How do I get to it? Up front, getting your business up and running. If you know those things, this is the server that was impacted. We can work around that this way. That's huge right off the bat as you're trying to reestablish your business, get up and running, find a way around whatever cyber incident has occurred. And then on the back end, ultimately you're going to have a forensic investigation, and they will hopefully be able to tell you, this is what the data might have been impacted. This server was impacted. These files, and if you've done that work in advance to say, okay, we know this server contained only this data, so we really aren't going to have any concerns because all that data was, no private information was in there, nothing of real import from that perspective, and so you'll be able to address the notification, how we require to provide notification pursuant to any laws issue a lot easier and quicker and less expensively than someone who has to go, well, I don't know what was on that server. I guess we got to go, find somebody who can look at it, and that's assuming you can access that data to begin with. So, vital step, knowing what you have, where it's stored. Again, ounce of prevention in this case will save you loads and loads of time and money having to go through those steps for the first time if you're dealing with an attack.
So let's break that down a little bit. I want to talk about that. You mentioned knowing your data, what you have, and where it is. You also want to know who has access to it and whether you need it, whether you still need to maintain it. I want to talk about that.
Again, other big things. We run into situations where, one of the major ways bad guys get into your system is through phishing attacks, of course. And for people who don't know what that means, those are the emails you get that look like they could be something real or not. You click on a link you shouldn't have clicked on, and all of a sudden somebody has access to that account. Now, we dealt with businesses where every single person in that business has access to every single bit of data, every system, every account, everything that
Right.
be accessed by every person from
We have seen
an
that.
assistant up to the CEO have the
Yes.
same access. And so one of the questions we ask when we go in to counsel clients is, will you control that access? If you have sensitive data, do the people who have access to that data really need to have access? You can limit who, again, it's you're trying to narrow down the window of opportunity for these criminals to get into your system, to get into sensitive data. And if you can say, yeah, this person really doesn't need to have access to this data or this system, you can try to create ways to isolate just who needs access to that system. And the other big thing you mentioned, of course, is data retention. And we're big on talking to clients about data retention policies, and it's not just who has access, but how long do you need, how long do you need to have this data sitting around for? If it's just sitting somewhere in some file that you're never looking at, that's just that's a bomb waiting to explode. If a bad guy gets in there and all of a sudden is accessing 10-year-old data that you haven't needed or had any reason to keep, but now you might have to go tell somebody who dealt with 10 years ago that, hey, we got a we had a breach, we had your information still, and now you're notifying them 10 years later, and their first question is going to be, why do you still even have my data? Why is that there? So controlling data access, controlling data retention, again, all great things to consider for preparation steps when you're trying to reduce the risks associated with potential breach.
So, Nick, I was thinking as you were talking about access, and I wanted to run an example by you. So, let's suppose that an organization has 5 employees, and all 5 employees have access to data. That's 5 potential attack vectors that a threat actor can use. So, if it turns out that only 2 of those employees actually need access to data, if you then prohibit access to the other 3, in a very real way, you are mathematically reducing the potential attack vectors, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Again, it's 5 people receive an email. You know, 3 of them don't click on it. 2 of them do. Um, you know, right there. If those 2 didn't have access to the sensitive data, you've avoided a potential breach situation. So it's again, it's all about reducing that risk. We don't like to go with scare tactics anymore these days, but the cybersecurity professionals would all say, in the years I've been doing this, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when you're going to have a cyber incident. So everything we're talking about is doing as much as you can to reduce the risk of it happening. Yeah, probably still going to have to deal with something, but it's also about reducing the impact of what happens when something happens.
Right. This is not a scare. This is really practical and helpful advice, right? If you do these things, if you know your data, and I want to come back to that in a second before we move on. If you know your data and you are limiting access as you should, and you're getting rid of old data that you don't need, that is going to increase your cyber hygiene, make it less likely that you will suffer an attack. But when the inevitable attack comes, it's going to make it a lot easier for you to respond. It's going to limit the potential cost that you will incur in responding.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. It's doing these little preparatory steps. Some of them don't cost you anything, and they can save you again, not just money. Obviously, that's very important. Businesses want to make money, but it saves you, hours, minutes, seconds that when you're dealing with breach in real time is are all vital.
All right. So before we leave the subject of knowing your data, I just want to drill down on that a little bit for those of our viewers and listeners that may find a little bit more clarity helpful. So we're talking about knowing your data. Give us some examples of the data that we're talking about. I'll throw one out there. One would be emails, I suppose. Another might be customer information. What are the different types of data that you see in your world as a breach coach that will give our viewers and listeners some context?
Yeah, so typically, most businesses maintain some information on their own employees, obviously, and typically there's some database or file where that information is maintained. You're going to deal with customers and customer account information. Sometimes that could include, financial account numbers or other, if you're dealing with individuals who might finance anything through your company, you could be dealing with finance documents that would have social security numbers or driver's license numbers. Um, emails are a huge issue. We've talked about this a number of times, um, because these days, obviously, everybody, for ease, is transferring everything email. Somebody needs a form filled out, you send them the form via email, they complete it, they send that back to you, and really that can turn into a big trap in a cyber incident situation, because that's if it's just sitting in an email account, it's there.
Right.
Bad guys could find it, but you also need to find it and determine if somebody has accessed that. So if you're a business that's regularly transmitting sensitive data, again, three big categories are going to be social security numbers, driver's license or other government ID numbers, and then financial account information. If any of that stuff is being transmitted back and forth with customers, vendors, whoever, by email, you're really going to want to think about how that transmission is done and how that information is kept. If it has to be done where you have to transmit that information via email, you want to have some protocol for getting it out of email, erasing it from email, putting it somewhere else. Preferably in a encrypted file of some sort. So even if somebody is able to gain access to your system, that has an extra layer of protection. Ideally, if you're going back and forth, if you're transmitting this sort of data via email, you want to do it in some secure way. A secure portal, secure attachment to an email, password protected files, anything like that you can do to protect the information that's being transmitted. Because the last thing you want to have happen is you have a ransomware attack and the forensic people are telling you, these email boxes could have been accessed. There's some evidence that the email was accessible to the bad guys, and now you're left with having to search through all of those emails to find any of the protected data that may have been transmitted.
So, if I'm thinking about this, Nick, and I'm not a cybersecurity expert, I'm just running my own business. I've got a small, medium sized manufacturing company, services company, and I'm thinking about it like it's my house. I wonder if that works. So, my house has, I open the door, I've got a living room, dining room, and a kitchen, and I've got bedrooms upstairs. If I know that my customer's financial information is kept in the kitchen, then when I have a breach and I bring in a forensic expert and the forensic expert tells me, all right, we know where they went. We're going to talk about risk assessment next. We know where the threat actors went. We know they didn't go into the kitchen. And I know that my customer's financial information is in the kitchen. I can draw a conclusion that the bad guy did not access my customer's financial information. So I sort of think of it with the analogy of a home. And I think that works because what we're really talking about is knowing what data you have. You have your customer's financial information and where you keep it. Where is it segregated in your computer system? Obviously, we don't have kitchens and living rooms in our computer system, but we have the equivalent of dedicated spaces, sometimes servers. And if you know in advance, you've made that preparation in advance, You know not only what you have, but where it's kept. How much easier does it make that data breach response than in systems where you and I have both been involved, where there's no segregation and there are no bedrooms or rooms in the house. You just open the door and nobody knows where anybody went at any one
Right. It was
time.
a flat instead of a.
Right.
Yeah. So that, I
Right.
mean, again, when you're responding to a breach, everything is. We'll talk about some other time. How the breach response actually goes, but the hours, the minutes, the seconds, they matter. And your analogy is a great one. If somebody broke into your house and you had them on camera just going into the living room, and they didn't go into the kitchen, you know, whatever you had in your kitchen was safe. And that's to be able to say that when you're dealing with the data breach, and the forensic people are telling you, they can tell you, hopefully, if you've done some preparatory steps, they can tell you, here's what we can tell. Here are the artifacts. The term of art they use is artifacts. Here are the artifacts that were left behind from the criminals to tell us where they got. And if they can say, we can say forensically they didn't get into the kitchen, then that whole batch. You don't have to worry about what was there. You don't have to worry about looking at that data to see if there was anything important there. The other
Any
option,
PII or PHI.
PII, yes, yeah.
In the case of, we're talking about customer financial information in our example, so in all likelihood, that is going to be PII, and that could trigger a duty to provide notice under one or more state laws. So that would be very important to know they didn't go into the kitchen, for example.
Yes, absolutely, and it saves you not only saves you time, it saves you expense, because the alternative is after the fact you're trying to look through all that data, sort through all that data, and that could be its own investigation process, which could take days, weeks, depending on how much data you have, and not only that, but time and expense. Somebody's got to go through. If you don't have that data, if you don't know what the data is, where it's segregated, and you're just looking at the whole system worth of data, that's an expensive process to go through and very time consuming when you're trying to answer questions about what happened. You have to notify people is somebody's sensitive information potentially out there for bad guys to do bad things.
Sure. All right, so let's move on. We talked a fair amount about knowing your data. What do you have? Where do you keep it? Who has access to it? Do you really need it at this point? I think that leads naturally into our second key to preparing for a data breach, and that is conducting a risk assessment. So talk to us now, Nick, if you would. What is a risk assessment? And give us some examples of what a risk assessment entails. And if you could, maybe start with system segregation, because that's really what we were talking about a moment ago when we were talking about the different rooms of the house. So what is risk assessment? What are some examples of what an organization should be doing as part of that assessment?
So risk assessment, can mean a lot of different things. There's no one size fits all kind of response to that. And a risk assessment for one business might not look like the same as for a different business. Different size business obviously is going to make a difference. The type of data that a business deals with is going to make a difference in what your risk assessment looks like. Obviously, a business dealing with healthcare data is going to be a little different than somebody who just deals with customer data. Both are important to protect, but what you're going to do in evaluating your risk is going to look a bit different. But one of the things about a risk assessment, going back to your house analogy, and it's something that one of our forensic friends loves to use, is a risk assessment is like a home alarm system. You got windows and doors. Are those windows and doors closed? Are they locked? Has somebody been going in and out of them that you didn't know about? And so, part of the risk assessment is looking at those things. How many windows and doors do you have? Are any of them open? Did you need to have them open? Should they be closed? Most likely, yes. On top of that, a risk assessment is going to look at your practices, the things we already talked about. Do you know what data you have? Do you know where it's stored? sort of things are you doing to protect it? You have multi-factor authentication. You have encryption. You have good, strong password policies. You have good, strong email use policies. What are my little pet peeves?
Right.
So a risk assessment can look at all of that stuff. It can look at distinct parts of that whole equation. Some risk assessments involve what's called penetration testing, where the company comes in and actually tries to get into your system. If we can get into your system, the bad guys might be able. So where are some of those vulnerabilities? So risk assessment is a broad. It's kind of a broad term, but it's something you really need to consider for your own business, what that looks like. And of course, we help people do that all the time. What things should you be looking at for your particular business? What are you dealing with? And what sort of policies and protocols do you have in place?
Right. You were talking about our friend. I should tell our viewers and listeners, the friend is, of course, Mike McCartney of Avalon, National Director of Cyber for Avalon. If you want to hear more from Mike about his analogy and the other topics we talked about, we've done 3 episodes with Mike McCartney. You can check those out on the Barclay Damon Live website or on Spotify or wherever good podcasts are sold. So we talked a little bit about risk assessment. Let's turn to the next issue, which is training. So we've talked about key 1, know your data. Key 2, risk assessment. Now, key 3 is making sure that everything you've done envelops your entire organization, including all of your users, right? Because you can have the best laid plans, but if nobody knows what your plans are or how to comply, you might as well not have them at all. So I know you've been involved in a lot of employee training in the course of your career, and as our cyber team co-leader, Nick, talk to us about that training. What does it look like? Why is it important?
And so, again, your technology is only as good as the people who use it. And you can have the best firewalls and best multi-factor authentication and best everything technology-wise, and you still have to account for the human factor, which is, in most cases, somebody gets an email, they click on a link or a document they shouldn't, and all of a sudden you have malware on the system. So, the training that we do is to try to help clients train their employees to identify, the sort of tricks that the bad guys use to try to get in. What does a phishing email look like? What is social engineering tactics that are used by some of the bad guys? We've done where you just put up examples. I mean, there are examples all over the place of what does this scam email look like, and you can share those with your employees. Hey, there's this alert just came out. There's a scam going around involving X and such company, whatever, Amazon, PayPal, whatever, Netflix, whatever the scam is. There's some information out there. You can share that with your employees. There are great training programs that are available that go through and train employees. Again, it's a technology-based training. They listen to some videos. They go through some examples. They answer some questions and kind of hands-on training that they can do. That's, again, when we're doing the training, we kind of go through those things. We also talk about some best practices that employees and employers should try to follow to avoid unnecessary exposure. Again, going back, I mentioned the email use policies, and one of my big things that I tell clients is you should have a policy that don't allow employees to use work emails for private accounts. Right? This way, if they get some email saying, "Hey, you have an issue with your Amazon account. Somebody just charged $10,000 to it."
Right.
They know, well, there's no reason I should be getting that email to this account. So they know that's fake, and they can delete that, and there's no chance they're going to click on that. And that's just that's an easy way the bad guys get in. They'll send emails that were very urgent. Big problem with some account, and a lot of times it's tied to things that really don't involve work.
Right.
I use Amazon because they've been a target before.
Sure they have.
Amazon email scams. There's the big PayPal scams. Your account's locked. You got to click on this to unlock it, kind of things. And if
Got to provide your
know,
login, your password, your credit card,
yep.
or so you look. There's that sense of urgency, often involving financial information. Checking the email address. You look at the email address, and if you hover over the email address, it changes to an address that you don't recognize. It's not someone from your organization, or there are misspellings. It's really amazing when we talk about, watch out for misspellings, watch out for incorrect emails, watch out for the sense of urgency. You say it and you think to yourself, well, of course, all of this is obvious. Of course that's it. Why would anyone fall for that? Well, people do fall for it, and the threat actors use those techniques because they work a lot, right?
Yep, absolutely. And again, I would say 50% of the breaches we're responding to have involved phishing attacks, successful phishing attacks, and a lot of times you can't trace the exact path, but it was somebody clicked on something, they executed this file on this person's account, and now all of a sudden they're into your system and they're moving around, getting into other systems and bad things like that. So training people to spot those, and they're more and more sophisticated every day. But again, it's about reducing the potential risk. And if you can eliminate a whole class of potential risk by saying, hey, don't use your work email for this kind of stuff, so that when you're getting in these emails that make it look very urgent, that, again, reduce that risk, and
right.
One less thing you got to worry about. And then, of course, training people on things they can look for, the number of items you mentioned, the spellings, the different, slightly different addresses, grammatical errors, generic greetings, dear customer, dear user, those sorts of things, signature blocks that don't really make sense on an email, all those things, you want to look for to avoid the phishing attack.
Right. So we've got one more key that I want to talk to you about in our remaining time, and that is something you alluded to earlier, which are policies. So talk to us in our remaining time about the written policies and procedures that every organization should have in place. I think one you mentioned was an email policy. So what are some of the other types of policies that every organization should have so that we're all prepared adequately for the inevitable breach?
Yeah, so, generally they fall in the category of data security policies or written information security plans. You see those used interchangeably. But things you want to consider, it'll be part of those plans or separate policies. However you decide to do it, you're going to want to talk about a password policy, right? What your password should look like, how many characters it should have, best protocols for coming up with good secure passwords, and how often those should be changed. The email use policy we've talked about, of course. Access policies, we touched on those as well. Who should have access and how do they get that access? Update policies, how often you're going to look to update your systems and your software and protocols you're going to follow for that.
So that's a similar update is similar, analogous to a patch, or a patch could be one form of an update.
Yeah, patch policy. Yeah, again, interchangeably patch policy, update policy. There are, again, depending on how you handle your data, and whether these would be part of your data security policy, your actual technologies in place, right? What your firewalls look like, what your encryption policies are, multi-factor authentication, all those things could be put into these policies. And then, on the back end, you should have a separate data breach response plan. And that's going to kind of spell out who's involved internally, externally, when there is some sort of issue. And then, again, the preferred way to do it is you have right there in your policy the list of people who are going to be called. If you have insurance, that would be on there as well. Your insurance policy, your carrier information, who the insurance policy says you dealing with these things beforehand, before you have an incident, writing up the policies, considering, risk assessment. That could be in a policy. We're going to do an annual risk assessment, have that right in the policy, what time of year you're going to do it. You can keep track of action items that need to be addressed in those policies. And hopefully, again, it's all about reducing the risk. And there's no one size fits all for the policies either, but having a discussion about, okay, what policies do we need, and doing that well in advance of something happening is going to put you really ahead.
Right. No, we have no one size fits all. I think it's so critically important what you say. I mean, not only are some organizations required to have these written policies in place because the regulations that govern the industry require it, but even if that weren't the case, I think there are just two really important practical reasons for it. And to me, one is you don't want to be thinking about this for the first time when you actually have to respond to a breach. If you put that time in to prepare, you're going to be able to execute your response much more efficiently, effectively, and successfully. And the second thing, I wonder your thoughts on this, that I always tell our clients is that you want to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do and it's going to help you respond. You also want to do the right thing because you want to be able to say that you did down the road. Because very often, not all the time, but we have seen situations where a regulator will come calling and will want to know from the client what they did or didn't do, what the thought process was. And if your answers to questions like, do you have a written incident response plan? Do you have a written information security plan? If your answers to these questions, or too many of them, are no, what does that mean?
That's bad news for you, because
Right.
as you said, Kevin, there's still just a myriad of laws out there that there's no one overriding law that says every business has to do this. New York does have a fairly new law called the Shield Act, which started to address that. Most businesses fall within the Shield Act, and there are a few things that everybody is supposed to do. I think that's a topic for another day. But
Yes.
if you do have a breach and you do have to provide notice, and part of providing notice could involve notifying one of these regulators, New York Attorney General or some other state Attorney General. They come and they ask you, okay, what happened? What protections did you have in place at the time? And yeah, if you're saying, well, we had an IT guy who, we had passwords, but that was it. They're going to look at that in this day and age and say you didn't do nearly enough. Everybody knows that data is important. Protecting other people's data is important. And if you're not considering these things, if you haven't done some of these things, and you haven't considered it, again, they're not going to come in and say, your business that is a small, medium-sized business should have been doing what Microsoft is doing. But they want to see, are you acting reasonably for your business, for the data you have? And if you can answer those questions reasonably well, yes, we've considered this. We considered it at the highest levels. Another big thing. This is, the regulators we've dealt with want to see that. They want to see the top down, not just that it was delegated to the IT people because they deal with IT, so they should be the ones responsible. They want to see corporate level, from
C-suite,
CEO,
board of
president,
directors.
whoever it is down,
Mm-hmm.
is taking this issue seriously. And if you can go back to the regulator and say, we did take this very seriously, we've done all these things, they're going to look on you a lot more favorably than somebody who, well, we got hit by this thing and we didn't know what we were doing, we didn't have protections in place, and now you're dealing with an angry regulator who's out there to protect other people's data, and you're going to be looking at them wanting to impose a hefty fine, and they'll make you do those things anyway, because if you haven't done them, regulators are very big on, okay, if you want to resolve this with us, not only are you going to pay us money, but you're going to do all these things, and we're going to make you do them now because you've been doing them before.
we've seen those situations for sure. So, all right, Nick, we've been talking about 4 keys to preparing for a data breach. We are near the end of our time. I had wanted to talk with you about breach response and some of the things that we have learned, particularly in the last 18 months or so. Would you come back and talk about that with us another time?
Absolutely. Just for you, Kevin.
All right. Thank you. We'll do a separate podcast on that. Nick, thanks so much for joining. I'm glad we finally got to sit down. I hope we do a lot more of these together.
All right. Thank you.
And thanks to all of you. If you enjoyed this podcast, like, comment, share. We always welcome your feedback. And we're back soon with another episode of CyberSip.
The CyberSip podcast is available on barclaydamon.com, YouTube, LinkedIn, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. Like, follow, share, and continue to listen. This material is for informational purposes only and does not constitute legal advice or a legal opinion. No attorney-client relationship has been established or implied. Thanks for listening.